Thank you, Grant. Thank you, Cpac Korea, and Annie Chan. Thank you for your leadership. Cpac Korea is now protecting the world's most vulnerable democracy. Leftists are trying to seize control of the government after the impeachment of President Yoon Suk-yeol on December 14th, and now they have filed criminal charges against him for insurrection. The only thing that is protecting democracy in South Korea are conservatives in the cold, on the streets, confronting leftists on Seoul and Daegu and so many other cities. What's at stake? Well, nothing less than the continuation not only of democracy, but also of the South Korean state, the Republic of Korea. If you want to know where the front line of democracy and freedom today is, it is in the streets of Seoul. Now, that's the summary. Let's get started. And this crisis did not start in December with the impeachment of President Yoon. It did not start on April 15th, 2020 with the National Assembly elections, but today we will begin there. And on that day, in the election, it resulted in an unexpected, overwhelming victory for Minju, the Democratic Party of Korea. Minju won that election because of early votes in district after district tipped the results to the leftists. There were so many uniformly narrow victories that it was statistically improbable. As one observer said, either God did it or the election was rigged. I know God did not vote in that election, but the Chinese rigged it. The National Election Committee, what they did was they used servers from Huawei Technologies, the Chinese company, which Beijing was able to access. Also, there is reporting that the NEC cooperated with Tencent, the Chinese internet giant, to develop algorithms to switch votes that had been decided early. This election was stolen. In 2024, just like in 2020, we had unexpected results and a big Minju victory. They did it again. This is something that never happened before in South Korean history. So we know that they took that election from the conservatives. NEC, National Election Committee, in 2024, they even hired Chinese to count the votes. So what's the consequence of all of this? Well, Minju now controls the National Assembly, as they have for the last 4 years, but something else, and that is Minju is not a normal political party. Its leaders somehow seem to think that they are still in the 7th century when China's Tang Dynasty controlled much of the Korean peninsula. So you have leftist leaders. They believe they are vassals of this magnificent Chinese state, or even servants of it. And they are now allowing Beijing to infiltrate South Korean society and to determine outcomes in South Korean elections. So the Chinese and their North Korean friends are now conducting their warfares campaign. There are 3 warfares: psychological warfare, media warfare, and legal warfare. And because of that, the Chinese have become extremely influential. Here's an example. In early December, when you had the big pro-impeachment rallies in Seoul, there were a lot of faces that were not Korean. They were like my wife's. They were Chinese. When the Chinese presence became a political issue in South Korea, what happened? The Chinese demonstrators all at once disappeared. How could that have occurred? We are also seeing strange-looking policemen on the streets of Seoul who are violent with no name tags. Maybe they're Chinese. We don't know for sure, but we can see that this is a time of unusual, certainly extraordinary events in South Korea. In South Korea, Minju, we now have a leader, Lee Jae-myung. He is just like previous Minju president with Moon Jae-in. It means that the South Korean state is at an extraordinary time. Now everything is at risk. Freedom is at risk, democracy at risk, South Korea at risk. And that means South Koreans can now lose everything. As that banner says, it's time to save Korea. Thank you very much.
I'd like you to comment on, give us the audience an idea of what is at stake with South Korea if it comes under control of one-party control of a leftist administration.
Thanks, Grant. South Korea plays a crucial role in promoting security in the Asia-Pacific and is a key strategic ally of the United States. That obviously gives strong motivations to China and North Korea to undermine North Korea, to create domestic instability, knowing that it will advance their interests and it will undermine American and global security. And this comes at a dangerous time because the threat from China and North Korea have really skyrocketed during the Biden administration because the Biden foreign policy was by far the most incompetent in American history. We've seen surges in threats to Taiwan, threats in the South China Sea, huge increases in the Chinese military spending, the Chinese missile arsenal, the Chinese nuclear arsenal. But I just want to talk about North Korea, which I don't think people have focused on. Biden decided to simply ignore North Korea. Now, you remember, Donald Trump had a very aggressive strategy. He engaged Kim Jong-un personally and significantly lowered tensions. Well, given Biden's incompetence and the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan in the summer of 2021, Kim Jong-un decided to surge his missile program. He fired at least 90 missiles in 2022, unveiled and tested a solid-fueled ICBM that can not only hit the United States, but will be easy to hide and very hard to destroy because it can be launched very quickly. We've seen North Korea joining this new axis with Russia, China, and Iran. There's talk that we already know that Iran has participated in joint military exercises, naval exercises with Russia and China. There's talk North Korea will do that too. And now we have North Korea giving weapons to Russia to use in the war in Ukraine. This includes ammunition, missiles, and troops. North Korea has become a much more dangerous rogue state than it was when Trump left the Oval Office because of the incredible incompetence and neglect of Joe Biden. Now, I think Donald Trump is going to take steps to reverse that, but there's a lot of work to do. But part of this rogue behavior by China and by North Korea is undermining South Korea's democracy. And I think that when we peel the layers of this onion back, we're going to find active effort, and we've already heard some very active efforts by China and North Korea to undermine North Korea's democracy because they are trying to undermine the security of the Asia Pacific, and if they can, drive the United States out of this region. So this election fraud issue is part of a much bigger security challenge.
Fred, I'd always heard that you hear it all the time, the U.S.-South Korea relationship is rock solid, forged in blood, can't be hurt. Is it possible that this alliance could come apart?
Right now, I don't think so. I think it is a rock-solid alliance. But there are leftists in South Korea who are pretty hostile to the United States, or they are too willing to appease North Korea. And that was certainly true of President Moon. But I think what we may see with the new left-wing president, he will be much worse than Moon, and we may see offers to North Korea that may give away so much freedom and security that South Korea may never get it back.
Thank you. And Gates, another something for you. Could you comment, Mr. China, could you comment on how China views South Korea, views the peninsula, views the U.S., South Korea, and Japan alliances?
Well, thank you very much. Basically, I would echo a lot of what Gordon gave by way of his introduction and description of the historical relationship and sort of the tributary or subordinate role that near or broad neighbors are meant to play. But I just want to flag a couple of anecdotes and maybe give a proposed solution or an example of how to get back. Number one, a lot of what Gordon described of plainclothes or unmarked agitators and police going in to change reality on the ground, we've seen this in Taiwan, we've seen it especially in Hong Kong. And in the erosion of freedom in Hong Kong, the great magic in a dark way of what the CCP was doing is it convinced the Hong Kong people themselves to destroy their own institutions and give up their own freedoms. And if you look, there's a second example of that is worldwide, but it affected us here. The COVID virus was developed and deployed out of China. They lied and manipulated the World Health Organization, but the greatest damage done to America during the COVID pandemic was Americans destroying our own institutions and our own freedoms. They got us to do it to us. And so what Gordon and others are warning about are Chinese Communist Party influence operations where they are trying to get Koreans to destroy their own institutions, the pillars of that vaunted alliance that has been forged in blood and should be rock solid. And so it is a version of this mind virus that goes out there. But the only way we can get back is if the Korean people get to a point where they've had it the way the American people had, that there's a Make Korea Great Again movement the way there's a Make America Great Again movement, and we've got to have a new golden age that is not in America but also in Korea. One of the tools to do that is election integrity. And I'll just end with this anecdote. One of the most attacked areas by the Chinese Communist Party is Taiwan. I've been blessed to spend most of my life from martial law to today looking at the electoral process in Taiwan. Somehow, in a single day, 12 to 15 million people are allowed to vote. They show an identification, they fill out a paper ballot that has witnesses, and they are able to go through and have results by 8 or 9 p.m. that end up not really even being contested. But they have a system. It's not America telling the world have to do it. One of the other vulnerable democracies already does this. And we don't need electronic systems to count. It's done by the precinct level up. And human beings have shown that they can do this with integrity in other countries. And so, watch out for the CCP influence operations. Watch out for the mind virus that gets us to attack each other and our own institutions. But do go back to making it easy to vote and hard to cheat with paper ballots and verifiable systems. With that, hopefully, we have a diagnosis and a prescription.
Professor Tan, or Ambassador Tan, excuse me, what do you've worked on these peninsula issues, human rights in particular. What do you think the possibility of future unification is? Could you comment on that?
I actually believe that we will see a united Korea someday. I have hope that that is the case. If you look at the Korean Peninsula at night, you see darkness over the northern part of the peninsula, and you see the southern part of the peninsula lit up like a Christmas tree. And this is a metaphor of the two Koreas as they are currently divided. North Korea is the most unjust, wicked, oppressive regime on planet Earth. And I'm saying that as someone whose job it was to deal with unjust regimes all over the world. It is number one along those lines, bar none. A friend of mine once described it, if you know the Lord of the Rings series, as Mordor. This is the heart of darkness in there. And a wicked regime as evil as North Korea will not be able to stand for a long time by historical standards. It will fall. Exactly how, exactly when, God knows. But will it be sustainable over a long time by historical standards? I would say no way, and history teaches us that. There is no sane reason why South Korea should want to become more like North Korea. There is no sane reason why South Korea should want to be overrun by communism. Because every time communism has been tried, it has led to the seizure of property of the people and the crushing of the people themselves. No exception, worldwide, every single time it has been tried. So then, those proponents of moving more in a North Korean direction, of falling more into the Chinese Communist Party's orbit, are advocating insanity. Moving into the current crisis in South Korea. Think about this. In these districts in South Korea, voting districts in South Korea, there were more votes than there were registered voters. How in the world could that not be cheating? When you have a situation where the National Election Commission is saying, nothing to see here, move on, folks. When you have the Constitutional Court rejecting an inspection of the voter rolls and saying that inspection into the electronic voting system is irrelevant and immaterial to the impeachment case of President Yoon, this is legal nonsense. And I say this as a legal scholar. President Yoon, under Article 77 of the South Korean Constitution, had the constitutional authority as president, as the duly elected president of South Korea, to declare martial law in a time of crisis for his country. He did this at great risk to himself as president, and he has been paying the price heroically for his country. For daring to do that, he is being treated as if he is some kind of criminal. You had thousands of police seizing him and throwing him into solitary confinement after the impeachment occurred. This is outrageous. He is the duly elected president of South Korea. And this is no way to treat the president of any country, much less your own president in your own country. The Constitutional Court of South Korea should know that they are being watched. They have a scant amount of time as they are rushing this process forward. And more, the world is watching. More and more, South Korean society is waking up to what is going on. There is a youth movement that is sweeping across the country along these lines. And President Yoon has a majority of the population in South Korea supporting him as they recognize his heroic bravery in trying to expose and call for the investigation of the serious election integrity issues that are facing this country. If the National Election Commission is confident in what it has done, why does it not divulge and expose what should be, in their claim, legitimate procedures? If they have something to hide, maybe that explains their behavior and their unwillingness to turn over the basic information that should be transparent and available in a democracy. And if a democracy loses its election integrity, then the fundamental right of the people to govern themselves and to choose those who represent them is lost.
Okay, thanks, Morse. We're